Welcome, everybody, to the #1 defense technology podcast in the nation.
The Joe Rogan of the industry.
Whoa, stealing my thunder. The Drone Ultimatum. And we have a really special live podcast today because we're here with a defense tech entrepreneur, Naweed Tahmas, a defense technology investor, Alex Moore, and a defense customer with Casey. So when those three types of people walk into a bar, what happens? Nothing.
I was going to say we get really nerdy about tech really quick.
I liked mine. Okay, so let's start it off. So I'll be moderating. I'm the host. And I think we got to just start with the headline. Epirus just raised a monster round, $250 million. Is that right? $250 million?
Yeah.
All right. What are we doing with that money?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just about, number one, like, very healthy sign in terms of overall health of the ecosystem. I think when we have, like, the capital, sort of the venture capitalists and family offices, every strategic groups coming together to support large projects, it's, like, healthy. It's a good sign for everyone else who has to raise money, too. So we're like, in a healthy place now with support for defense startups. So that's really cool. That's cool for everyone. Specifically for Epirus, it's just continuing. We have a long R&D cycle. We feel strongly we are basically inventing like the modern use case for directed energy. There's been other projects where people have tried, but we think we're driving towards more of this like iPhone form factor or next stage of like the effects on warfare. Starting with counter drone, it's funny though, like Hollywood actually has directed energy in the last Bond and Fast and Furious. So it's like, I'm like, yeah, it's gonna look like that.
What was the last Bond? What was that one? I can't remember.
It's where he dies at the end.
Oh yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Is there another? Is there gonna be another Bond?
Yeah, but so they had one in Fast and the Furious. They had one where it like sucked this one of the cars to the side. Not quite Epirus, but and then Bond he had a watch.
I don't have my producer Jack here. Normally on the podcast we'd put up the video of the Bond movie. I'm out of my studio right now.
We're just shooting down drones so far, but just in a more serious like version. Yeah, Epirus is there to shoot down drones with directed energy. This is really good for like heavy asset defense, like for deployed bases. But eventually, it should be maybe a form factor that goes on a General Dynamics Striker, make it mobile, and then you can use directed energy on anything with electronics. So I'll let people use their own creativity on what else it could work on.
Sweet. Okay, so the show is venture backed lethality today. I think did you come up with that name? I think you might have.
I mean, Scott did,
okay,
in all
Scott,
fairness.
Well, Scott, no, obviously.
But it's because that's one of the biggest trends we're seeing in the industry right now. When we launched our annual report, like an hour before this, one of the biggest things I said is when we started in 2019, AAL did, I was terrified that working with us would make companies radioactive to investors. Joke's on me. VC and private equity have poured like $160 to $200 billion of money into defense-related technologies. And what we're seeing is they're becoming increasingly less dual use. We're seeing investment in low-cost kinetics. We're seeing a lot of investment in directed energy. And while I would personally argue there's a case for counter-UAS for utility and infrastructure protection, there are regulations when you're in a city that you maybe can't use the same things you would do if you're on a forward operating base. So, some defense first aspect in that as well. So that's where it came from, right? And it's something we're really interested in at AAL, not just because of the benefit to the Army, but because it's kind of a paradigm shift in how the DoD needs to think. Because so often if we're like, we need a better battery, or even robotics, that makes sense. We're going to go to commercial industry. We're going to go to non-traditional industry. But lethality, that's the primes. That's our awesome labs and centers. And now there's a paradigm shift.
So how do you think about it? A lot of times when I'm talking to the government, they really want to work with companies that have a dual use. And a lot of the things in infrastructure that I've seen it then set up over the last decade is like for to have the government more easily work with dual use. I think the DIU on their homepage has like a dual use mandate. But these are like new tech companies coming out without a dual use, and some of the old like requirements and infrastructure have been set up around dual use. So do you see it as a challenge for these startups because the pockets of money quite aren't there since there's no dual use?
I'm going to say yes and no. I think where it's not a challenge is that companies that are making dual use tech often have a challenge in the early days of their company about do they build for commercial or do they build for defense? And in my opinion, you probably need to focus on one or the other and get it good to be successful and then figure out your second one. And what I would argue is you probably should focus on commercial first. And the reason I say that is in order to really survive working in defense, you either need deep venture backing or you need revenue so that when the government contract doesn't come because there's a CR that's delayed the budget or priorities change and that contract, the funding for that contract gets pushed out a year to 18 months, you have the funding to weather that gap. So I think it's easier for companies because if you only have one market and that's defense, you're not splitting your focus. The challenge, though, is where does that secondary like backup come from in case the DoD can't deliver on the timeline we originally thought we would? That's why I'm really excited to see venture investing in companies that are maybe not dual use. But I also think that's where our allies and partners come in figuring out how to break down barriers for companies that are defense-specific tech to grow secondary lines of business to say our Australian or UK or Canadian allies is also a way to maybe buffer against uncertainty.
Okay. So Naweed, you make a missile, a next generation missile, I would say, right? And it's not dual use, or is it?
Unfortunately, you can't hit your neighbor yet with it.
Okay. So we're going for the military use case.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about that? How your experience doing that?
So in the beginning, when we first started the company, lethality was not trendy or hot. At the time, that was the peak of the dual use, and I never really bought into the dual use concept because as a small startup, you can't tackle two battlefields at the same time, commercial and military, which are both incredibly difficult markets. And when you work with the military, you know that they have their own specifications. They have their own ruggedness and qualification, and it doesn't always apply to the commercial market either. And so you're splitting your resources, your money, and as a small team, you just can't do that. And what I also believed is with a lot of some of these autonomous systems we were seeing at the time, when back then they weren't lethal, was I knew the military wanted to find a way to add missiles and weapons to them. And so from the very beginning, we're all in on lethality. We believe that was what was missing. We're depending on only a few vendors. And what we build, just so everybody knows, is, our system's called Zeus. It's, like you said, a next generation missile system. It's designed to be a single system that could be used on a variety of different platforms, whether it's a drone, containerized, missile out of a box, or shoulder fired. Because what I was seeing at the time was there was a lot of troops and warfighters on the ground that were depending on unguided rockets. And it didn't make any sense to me. And when you talk to them, they're like, well, the reason why we use these essentially bazookas was because they've been one around for 30, 40 plus years, was because it was lightweight. And the next precision system was heavy and bulky. And so we're all about how do we deliver advanced tactical weapon systems that are modular and lightweight and that they could use in a variety of different ways.
That makes sense. I like that. So, Alex, on Saronic, okay, the surface vehicles, unmanned surface vehicles, interesting market. We're seeing some companies go more into the defense sales part, and some of them are doing a commercial use case. How do you see that strategy? I know are you on the board?
Yeah. We incubated that at APC. Saronic, we're definitely going, we were trying to build the ultimate startup for the Navy, right? So all the problems that are sort of Army facing stuff, like the Navy problems are worse. These shipbuilders are awful. The ship costs $1 billion. It takes 8 years to build. An aircraft carrier costs $10 billion. It takes 10 years to build. All of these can, have 2,000 teenagers on them that go to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean with a Chinese hypersonic missile. This is not the right paradigm. So we're like, this is a World War II Navy. So Saronic is basically the unapologetic, big dollar, we're going to go redo the whole thing and build boats. starting with 24-footer Corsair. It's basically it's a boat. It's a boat. We call it sort of a maritime drone. No human being in the loop at all, and then it's just a platform for third-party devices. So like even the things you guys build should end up on. If we want to make them maritime, just throw it on our platform.
That's happening right now.
Right. We have
No
the platform
yet.
for you. But I think then going back to that, yeah. So like the goal is to build like larger boats. We want to take advantage of the Ships Act. Like we're way ahead of all of that. We're going to buy shipyards. That's exactly why we raised the big round.
So yeah, so you're indexing into the non-dual use. You're going defense with this.
We're going defense with
Yeah.
it. I mean, later if we own all the shipyards in the country and we want to build shipping boats and that don't have humans, or if there's other use cases, but I think it is starting with like in that one is like the unapologetic like defense. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's have a point of view on this. We're a defense company. We build for the Navy. Our CEO's a Navy SEAL. Our business guys are Navy SEALs. We have a lot of Navy people. They all know everything about the Navy. We're all in the Navy.
Yep.
And that's the company. So
Yeah, so the question becomes, obviously it has product market fit. Like unmanned surface vehicles make a ton of sense. Like I don't think anyone in the audience would disagree with that. But we're not like really at war. So like how do you see the government buying enough of them?
yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think that's like maybe what we're all doing. Like if we're all building these defense companies and we're just like going to the deep end of the pool and like getting on the diving board and then doing a big cannonball into it and like not knowing like what happens, right? No, but I do think it is like some sort of belief around if you're building a defense startup company and then hopefully like people listen to this podcast and like we want more people to do this. It's like some belief that we are like modernizing the American military industrial base, and that the old stuff, and like nothing bad about primes or anything, but like they're set up in like the old system that like Dwight Eisenhower warned us about, right? Like we're at the tail end of that epic, and then I think this is to be a VC in defense or to be an entrepreneur in defense, you have to believe in this. We're at the beginning of Epic 2, which is we're done with the World War II stuff. Now we're looking at things like AI, autonomy, autonomous drones, asymmetric threats, needing form factors. I need missiles that I can afford. I need a gun turret that's AI that shoots things down reliably. I need to get human beings out of the loop. We need to save money for the taxpayer. So like the old way, like this like incompetence thing or these big programs, $1 trillion planes, we got to end that, right? Like that's what Doge is. That's what all this stuff is. But it's also not just that. It's not just like we're at the end of the debt cycle, which is probably part of it. But there's also been a revolution in microelectronics and autonomy software and AI and everything that goes into a smaller version of a high efficacy machine that accomplished maybe what something the primes, it took them $1 billion or $100 million or $10 million or missile, whatever, $4 million for a missile. You just can build the same thing for like 90% off now because all of the components are cheaper. So that's what's really happening here is like when he builds the missile, like he's building something that takes advantage of like every aspect of the hardware that goes into that. Itself had a revolution in the last 5 years and became 90% cheaper and 5x better.
So Casey, how do you, and this may be leading the witness, so I don't know if this is the right question, but like, okay, so the AAL and other labs like yours, help with a lot of R&D for some of these lethal products. But as I mentioned, we're not like going to battle like in a full-scale war. So do you view it like you'd help these products get mature and then maybe later you guys could procure them, but you don't really need to like actually procure them yet?
So AAL doesn't procure.
Exactly. I'm just saying like you help them and then the other people. But how do you view that? Like that's that chain.
So here's what I'll say. We are still buying things even though we are not at war. We need to replenish stockpiles. We have learned lessons from wars in Ukraine and the Middle East about how much we might need to have on hand in case of a future conflict. So the Army is still out there buying things. The question is, are we buying enough of them to make enough money for these companies? And I don't know that answer yet, but it's not like we're not buying anything. We definitely are, as an Army, buying.
Yeah, would you would you guys make a calculus of like, hey, we need to buy a bunch of these to like keep them going, or how does that even work?
So once again, not what AAL does, definitely what our acquisition partners
I meant for the
ASL
larger
do.
Army.
They do, yeah. So there are definitely contracts that the Army has that are, they buy enough every year to keep the manufacturer line open. So we definitely do that as an Army.
That sounds like something an investor would get very excited about. Not really. Just buy enough just to keep them open, you know. No big deal.
I mean, there's always a tension, right, between how do we keep the industrial base warm enough, and what is warm enough is something that the DoD is constantly evaluating. And then the return side of the calculus is warm enough actually warm enough for the investors and the companies?
Yeah. So Naweed, how do you think about getting this missile to market? Like, what is the next step for your company? We all got to know.
Well, to kind of answer your previous question as well that you asked Alex and Casey, is when you're building something that has a 10-15 wait time that is in demand right now, but customers have to wait such a long time for it, and there's not enough in the stockpiles and reserves, the customer will buy it. The Navy doesn't have enough ships and autonomous vessels yet. You know, the Army, the Navy, all the branches don't have enough missile systems yet. You know, we see right now there's platforms that don't have any missiles on them because they just don't have enough to go around. And we're depending on only a few vendors. And so when we talk about the companies and systems we have currently, there's just too much vendor lock where we're depending on one company for it. So they are buying right now. If you're building a product that the DoD needs, they will buy it. I think the problem for some venture-backed companies maybe is what they're building doesn't have a clear need just yet, right? And that's when you run into the issues and the valley of death. But when you're building something that has massive demand, not only the US, but globally, we have seen a lot of traction and a lot of customers that are waiting to buy from us the moment we're ready. But let me just add one more thing, because we're in AAL.
Please do.
This is actually really where I started the company. Was one of the first conversation I had before I even incorporated Aon was with Ariel and others at AAL, and then the first month as a business, I walked through those doors with our first prototype of a missile and met with Casey and Aaron Stetson and Alex and a few others, and kind of talked to them about the idea. And I have to say, when it comes to AAL especially, they were incredibly forgiving in the beginning. As a brand new company that's never even submitted a proposal before, it kind of taught us how to sharpen our skills, refine it, how to talk to customers better, how to pitch across the board, and then also connected us with those procurement offices as well in the Army. And they gave us really good feedback on here's what we actually need, here's the requirements. But so if you are building something that is in demand, there is a customer for it, and they want to buy more of it.
And that makes sense. And I think 8BC has done a good job incubating. Talk about your process for identifying those customer needs. I mean, also, I'm sure Casey probably just has a list of needs. You could probably just ask, what is like your process for that?
Yeah, that's really good. A good question. I don't know. I think it's like a mix of just us being immersed in this space, and then two, just what we call an EIR, entrepreneur in residence. You know, in sort of if they have something they've looked at in particular. But I feel like every company you are starting from zero. So because people always kind of go, well, APC, you guys have a build program. What's like your playbook? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm actually, it's a little more like flexible than that, where I think these companies get started for like strange reasons, you know, and so we're sensitive to that too. Sorry, I'm not giving a fantastic answer, but yeah, I think it's like finding the big holes in the market.
Yeah. Or do you just share the list or what?
I mean, okay, look, the Army has a lot of lists of problems. They take many forms. So at AEL, I want to hear about problems that people are having. These may not be officially documented capability gaps. They might not be on any particular list, but just tell me a problem you have. And I will say 90% of what AAL does is then go out and solve those problems. Now, occasionally, we will see something that the Army isn't asking for because it falls in between stovepipes of our acquisition system, or because the Army doesn't know to ask for it. Great example of this is some of this new low-cost lethality. The Army doesn't know to ask us to go look for it because it doesn't think it exists in the commercial sector yet. So about 10% of what we do is that. But that's harder because when you have a problem, you can line all the stakeholders up front. So companies don't have to do BD into the Army. They get soldier feedback, stakeholder feedback from the beginning. When you're coming in and you're like, this could go to one of 4 different buyer offices, it's a lot harder for the Army to ingest that tech. So just from a workload perspective, we can't make that all we do, or we relive some of the early mistakes of DI/UX that we've luckily learned from.
That's cool. Okay.
Wait,
I have
Steve,
some.
real quick.
Wait, okay, you're gonna jump
Any
in.
founders in the room? That's awesome. You're in the right place. This is by far the best front door into working with the DoD. That's connecting with all the customers.
That's high praise.
And what AL's really good at that I like about compared to other maybe innovation offices is they're focused on day one to find you a transition partner to transition over. So you're not just stuck in R&D world forever. They map it out, the whole process from here's where you start, here's where you end.
What's an example of a transition partner? Get tangible. Like what is
So
name
for us,
one.
there's really one office that buys our systems in the Army. It's the Tactical Aviation Ground Munitions, TAGM, in Huntsville.
Okay.
And so in day one, when we met, that's what Casey told us, like, this is the office you have to get to. So you have to start working with them now. And they set up those meetings for us. We talked to them. We figured out what their needs are, how to work with them, and how to build something ultimately that they want in the end. So you're not just focusing on building something for R&D, but something that the warfighter needs.
Okay. So is there like a list of transition partners that these new founders in the room can figure out? How do they do it?
So the Army, in order to buy something, in general, I'll get to the edge cases in a minute, you go through what are called our program executive offices, or PEOs, in the Army. We have one for everything soldier. We have a joint program office, meaning it's pan-DoD, for missiles and space. That is where PM TAGM is. We have a joint program office for armaments and ammunition and chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear defense. So what you got to do is you kind of got to figure out what program office you're in and then work down from there. Shameless plug, we're holding office hours this afternoon. We're happy to help people try to work through that. But if you're listening at home and you don't have access to our office hours this afternoon, Google is your friend. Also, reach out to AAL, join our network, send us a question. We do virtual office hours and can try to help. Now, let's say you got a low-cost system. Maybe it's not lethal. Ideally, for this situation, it's not lethal. There is no sustainment trail, because if it breaks, you are just going to throw it out. Then there are other avenues of going directly to units, getting in the GSA catalog, if it's software, getting on a system called Chess, where units can go direct and buy it. So there are other pathways that are limited outside of PEOs, but especially if we're talking about lethality, PEOs, they're your customer.
Yep. All right. So let's switch gears a bit. So we have a elite investor on the podcast today, so we got to get in on this a little more. We got to talk about, do some forecasting, some market analysis. So you mentioned we're at the end of a debt cycle. Yep. We've got a lot of uncertainty. We've got some tariffs coming in and out. We've got massive debt. Obviously DOGE is cutting spending, so that's going to maybe affect the GDP. What do you see from an investor standpoint in this realm? And you notice how long these contracts are taking. You sit at the front seat, so like in defense, that's happening. So is it like diamond hands time? Just keep putting in more money and hold, or what?
Yeah, so great question. I think there's a few things going on where, in terms of like the geometry, like so there's like a difference in the geometry of how venture capital is used for a defense company than like a software company, right? So first things first, I think like the venture capital group of people is like gonna get some education on that. Dollars in, good for us. We just want more dollars for the ecosystem. And then I think what's actually happening is the shift in how warfare is being fought already in Ukraine, but also how it will be fought in the future, shifts hard into what Silicon Valley, or sort of what startup people are good at. Startup people are good at software. Startup people are good at attritable systems, building hardware, rapid prototyping, manufacturing. Now that all these SpaceX people, manufacturing people are coming off, and they're coming in building all of our factories for us. Thank you, Elon. So it's just like the needs of the warfighter are moving away from like, what do they call it? Like overly elegantly designed machines that are too expensive. And then the debt cycle, just like the DOGE, like people are going to want just better value for the dollar. So like the thing where you spend like unlimited amounts of money and you maintain this old system, and then like a drone just like takes it out, boom, your tank's gone. We need to shift to like, no, let's have our drones go get their tanks. Like let's be the asymmetric one, right? So I think like there's just a shift. I think this is what the VCs think is happening, is like there's a shift hard into what our stuff is good at. And then the talent. I think for me, it's just the talent. I like go to colleges and talk to young people. He has the college hat on. I'm more curious what he thinks. What does his friends think about defense? That's probably where it's going. So like the talent is coming into defense, and then like the quote unquote the talent, like when you have like 5,000 smart engineers a year coming into the industry, they start fixing stuff quick. Things happen fast. And that's, I think, what the VCs are attaching to here. In terms of like the severe geometry, the severe timeframes, like we can't really speed up DoD cycles yet, and like we'll see what happens with Doge. But like I still am like kind of a long-term player. We've been doing this for 20 years. When we were originally working on Palantir, we had to sue the Army because they wouldn't buy our product, so we sued them, and then they bought the product. Because there was a lot of like pretty illegal
Sue
stuff.
your customer. That's how you do it.
Taking notes here.
So like I don't think we're in like end game like startups are adopted right away. I think we're in middle game. Yeah. Early game was Palantir sues the Army and wins. Middle game is now hard right into things we're really, really good at. VC dollars come in. Stage after that, full bloom, like lots of winners, really cool stuff happening. Stage 4, maybe like severe pressure on the primes, because we say, we got all the new forward-facing stuff. Let's go get the old stuff now. Airplanes and tanks and whatever. You know
Casey,
what I mean?
you got some stuff on
Something
this?
like that.
Casey, I promise I won't sue you.
Okay, thank you. I'll say the other thing I just want to add that I think startups are really good at, that is going to be incredibly important in the future, is moving quickly and rapidly iterating and developing. The development cycles that startups do are weeks, maybe months. One of the biggest lessons we're learning out of Ukraine is that systems that go to the front line are useful for a couple of weeks, maybe 6 at best, and then they've got to go back and they've got to get something fixed. So that level of agility is something that startups really bring that is going to be super critical going forward.
So we're not then, Alex, too early. This isn't like Webvan and then DoorDash or whatever.
I don't think so. I think I was talking, and I like what happens is when every VC firm, because just like Joe Lonsdale and I have been doing this just a little bit longer than everyone, but not that much. It's still, things are fresh, but they kind of like the big firm adds a defense person. That person calls me and goes, what should I do here? They want me to build a book of stuff in defense, and I'm like, where are we? I think it's like I think my analogy is like inning 3. I'm like, it's like still like really, really early. And it is correct, if you're a VC firm and you want to be in part of like the next stage of rebuilding American manufacturing, industrial base, et cetera, that you should make some. I tell them, be bold, right? Like be bold. Like find things that fit whatever you guys are doing, and then like go write a really big check. It's like these things are semi-capital intensive, and 2, then just creating some honesty around. What you were saying earlier, sometimes there's reasons even out of your own control or the customer's control where they delay the program, and like that's not the customer's fault, that's not whatever. But then like the startup needs to be like fortified on the balance sheet and be ready to sort of like withstand a little bit of that stuff too. So I think the investors need to understand all that when they invest. But I'm like, no, I think we're early here. If spaces get overly invested in, then like what happens is consolidation, or what we've seen that in other areas of the economy. So like that could happen too, but I'm not too worried about that right now.
Naweed, what's some tips for fundraising for some of these entrepreneurs in the audience?
Yeah, I think it's just like building
you took it from Naweed. That's cool though, bro. No, you can do that.
No,
VCs always love talking for startups.
VCs always taking
typical.
You're asking what's some tips for fundraising?
For when you're just starting out in lethality.
When we're starting out, like I said, I'm not also completely convinced, outside of 8VC, that many funds are ready for real lethality either. Yeah. But what really helped us...
It is true. It's narrow. It's pretty narrow.
Yeah. As a defense tech founder, right, you chose this incredible challenge that's highly rewarding, right? There's many ways to get rich, but this is by far the most worthwhile mission you could have because you're helping real warfighters. I would say the biggest game for a founder is it's a game of complex coordination. You have so many different moving pieces. You have the Congress you have to juggle, right, from House and Senate side. You have the executive branch you have to juggle. You have end users directly. You have program offices, acquisition officers, and you just have to get good at balancing this. And so, what I did was, you have to realize that 95% of people probably aren't a fit for what your product is doing, and you can't be phased by that. You just got to keep going until you find that rabid champion for you. And so that's what helped me very quickly was I just talked to and cold emailed a lot of people. As you know, one of the things that helped us out was we were in the congressional budget within our first 3 months as a company, and what people always ask me is like, did you hire a lobbyist? Which lobbying firm did you hire? I just cold emailed a bunch of chiefs of staffs, and I went to their offices with the missile in Capitol Hill. They told me it was the first time anyone's walked in with the missile, and I went door to door to all of those offices.
Yeah.
And some of them yelled at me or shut the door, and some of them were like, this is awesome, we want to help you out. And so we still have no lobbyists to this day. And so it was just, you have to be really scrappy in how you do it. So that's kind of my tip from a fundraising standpoint is show traction, right? Show that Congress is on board with you. Show that offices, including AL's, on board with what you're doing. You need to show demand signal for the investors. And that shows them, all right, there's a market here, there's an opportunity here. This isn't a charity, right? They're still trying to make money. And so when you have those pieces in place, it makes it a lot easier to raise.
Yeah, one thing I always talk to founders about for just any startup really is like the power of cold email and cold calling, because if you cold email someone and they respond, it's kind of higher signal that they have a need there versus like if someone intros you to someone, that the person might just be taking the meeting because they feel bad, Like, so like there's a lot of power in that. And some of our early customers are just cold email as well and cold LinkedIn outreach.
You have to know the game. Every industry has the game, and you have to know the game of your industry. And defense also has its own game.
Yeah. Alex, what are some? I know you probably can't share it, but I know you got the boats, you have the microwaves. Like, what's the other area you're looking at next? I know there's got to be another incubation, somewhere behind the.
Yeah, I'm not sure next for incubations, but yeah, we also, we did incubate a company called CX2 last year, which is.
I didn't know you did that. I didn't know it was incubation.
Yeah, that's one of ours. We did that, and then which is putting these like. Network control, network jammers, but like instead of one big jammer, which is like what it is now, then we put that in like the autonomous drone swarm, and then so it's like 2 swarms, right? It's like the first swarm is go map the battlefield, like find all the enemy tanks and jam their GPS, and then the second swarm is kamikaze kill everything, right? So we're gonna have 2 drone swarms, and it's sort of the offensive version of drones. We should have not just wait for them to bring that on us. Second incubation is Gallatin AI, which is defense logistics software. And it's just the thesis that the consumer can track a package on their phone, and then the Army can't track, like, why can't the Army do that, with their stuff, right? So can you track everything on your phone? No. Okay, well, then the consumer has more technology than you do. So just Gallatin AI is just, and why is that? It's just because, like, the DoD can't share like sensitive hardware data with Amazon or like these other commercial guys. So you have to set up everyone has to have a clearance. We have to have SCIFs. We have to have the protected data and go through all this and certifications and you have to set up a company for them where you can do that. So like on some level, Gallatin, it's like we don't have to reinvent the entire wheel. We just have to do some blocking and tackling, like give them a product they can actually adopt that does the basic stuff. But then that adds ideally like a lot of like revolutionary value because you really optimize your supply chain and not have, it's a lot of stuff. It's like the plane is down because there's one part that's in Germany and we need the one part to get here from Germany. It has to come on a C5. That takes a week and a half. Like we ran out of bullets. The bullets are over there. We got to bring the bullets here and then caravan them in. It's like that times a billion, right, or whatever. So just some of this blocking and tackling stuff. That's the Gallatin idea. But I think we're beefing up those guys before we're incubating anything.
I got an incubation question. I'm gonna take a turn here. So since the entrepreneur is not really taking as much risk, right? Because you're kind of giving them the capital, the room to do the idea. Like, how do you do the cap table? Like, does it like 40% go to 8VC or?
We take 30%, so 20% for the fund and 10% for the operators, and then we'll put in like 8 to 10 million. So like the valuation when we start it is you get 8 million for what for 20%, 40 posts.
Okay.
So it is like actually very fair, and like it lets us. You can't get, and this is like everyone who starts an incubator in the country calls me. And they, like we have like the most normal looking cap table, because like, you know, like in recent, like smart firms won't like invest in companies that have like weirdo cap tables where the incubation group is like robbing it from.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So we want to just have a normal thing. We do take the 10%, we split with our group, where so it's like I'm, you know, so
you're not a big noose on the cap table. It's not a huge weight. Like it's 10%. You know.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. So we basically say like we're the third co-founder. And then we have like our lobbying firm. I have a bunch of recruiters, designers, and then our whole group of advisors. I'm recruiting your first 10 engineers, this kind of stuff. So it's just a blended model. It's actually like an accommodation for 8VC to keep me to properly utilize me as like more of an operator person who could be bored if I was just doing VC stuff all day.
Yeah, that's fun. Something that I like to do for fun at home by myself is I like to look up companies, and then I like to draw their cap table of what I think it currently is, and I like map it out. I do that, and I bet you I don't know. I want to check with you. I have a couple I want to see. I'm gonna run it by you.
Happy to help on that.
Casey, what do you think about cap tables?
So cap tables for us are really interesting because we are looking for foreign investments. Not all foreign investment is bad, but if a foreign investor or even a U.S. investor has taken money from a potential adversary, that is bad. So every company in our portfolio, we do a due diligence adversarial capital check, and we don't just do it at the beginning. If you guys raise, we do it again. If you hire a new CEO or a new C-suite exec, we're going to look again. If we decide it might just have been too long since we've run you, we're going to do it again. About 10% of our portfolio comes to us with some concern about adversarial capital. It's not always visible on the cap table. We've had companies that have taken money from investors that they firmly believed were clean, and guess what? They weren't. But none of those have been unmitigatable. So our strategy is like, unless it's absolutely egregious, we want to put a mitigation plan in place that still gives the Army access to that technology, but we've just put the firewalls up to make sure the use case or whatever it is that is sensitive doesn't potentially make it back to the individuals or the fund of concern.
Okay, so like, I don't know the actual, so like sovereign wealth funds or something, like we can't take money from them, right? Or how does it, I don't know the actual rule.
It all depends on where they're from and what your industry is. There's no handbook right now that says take money from these guys and not those. I will say what I have seen is if there are firms that have very large cap tables, typically commercial first, that didn't pay attention to where the money came from because they were commercial first and it didn't matter, create firewalled gov divisions that are free from that money, that in addition to firewalling them off from the potential investors of concern, also allows the rest of the company not have to adapt like DoD accounting systems or DoD bonus structures that you have to do. So that's one way I've seen people handle it when they didn't think about that up front.
Okay, cool. Also, real quick, you want to say something?
I just say
you got
two
a cap
things.
table thing?
No, just two things I'm just thinking about for the founders of the room that I think we understand that we should pass on to is we're talking about fundraising, right? We understand the value of a really good team. And, you know, you and I went out and found some of the best people. You know, for us was the Skunk Works hypersonic missile engineers that understood the product. So when you're building out your team, making sure you're bringing people that have the inside knowledge, whether it's from the warfighting side or from the engineering side. And then
you're from the warfighting side?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
No, that's why I have James and Joe here. The other thing that is you have to remember, you know, as a founder, you think your product's amazing, right? You think you are helping somebody solve a critical need. It's going to change the country. Then you realize no one actually cares about what you're doing, right? They have so much going on in their lives. They have so many other projects. You have to make it interesting for them to work with you. You have to create an incentive, whether that makes them look good or otherwise. You have to understand their side. Like if I was in the shoes of this acquisition officer, right, and some company, you know, company number 50 pitching me, another VC-backed company, how would they take this pitch? Why would they care? How do I de-risk this for them? How do I make it interesting? How do I solve their pain point? And how do I make it a win for them? I think in the beginning as a company starting out, I mean, all of us went through this. We're like, hey, we're making a big difference. But the reality is, most people don't care. When it comes to Congress, it's like, what does this do for my district, right? You go to every Congress member, like, cool, cute product, but what does this do for me? And so that's something you have to understand.
I want to add one more thing. If you are licensing your technology from somewhere, I very much care what that license is. How clean is it? Do you own it outright? That licensing picture is something super important to think about, because if your licensing deal, it's essentially, and I've seen tech transfer offices do this unintentionally, is it a poison pill that's going to make you never want to invest in them because the terms are so onerous? Especially if you're hardware, you're never going to get the money you need to scale. So really, really think about your licensing deal. We pay attention to that too. So
switching gears again, I want to talk about, since this is a drone podcast, we talk about drones a little bit, but I want to talk about the humanoid robots. Is AAL doing anything with humanoid robots yet?
We are not. Not because they're not cool, not because they couldn't help now, but that's just not a problem we've been asked to go out and solve. I will say, Aptronic is one of our portfolio companies. Very early on, we worked with them, very early on in AAL. Their robotic arm, they adopted it for ammunition resupply, and it remains one of the things I am most frustrated I could not get into the Army.
Yeah, I've been talking about the Unitree is like the Chinese one that their sales reps email me like every week. You know, the price keeps dropping. It's like $11K now for the 4.5 foot like sweet humanoid robot. And these things, they're ready to pump these out now. And so like I think they're probably just going to win the U.S. market. But what are your thoughts on that? You're probably friends with Elon. He's got the Tesla one coming, but it's probably years away. Like, how do you view China winning yet another drone market after they won FPVs and now maybe humanoids?
Second to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think on the VC side, like we actually had a really, really hard time because I think there was an obsession of like the humanoid robot in the firm. But then the idea, and I love the app. I tried to invest in Aptronic. This company's great. It's Austin, a based company that has an amazing project here. Really smart founder. But like our firm got very nervous competing with Elon because we were like, oh, Tesla's doing that. Yeah. And there's like a dirty little secret where the first Tesla like humanoid robot, it was an Aptronic robot. No, I don't know if he wants.
I didn't know that actually.
I don't know if we're allowed to say that.
I believe that though.
And then they were like we're building a humanoid robot, and then just use the Aptronic robot. So it's like really our Austin-based guy. But no, so I think on the VC side, if it's not uninvestable, it just feels really, 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 really hard when you're like, oh no, is like, does Elon have the main project here where that has lots of scale and like engineering that has an advantage, and it becomes hard to like bet against that. But it's coming. So yeah, I love to hear even your guys' thoughts.
I mean, I think he'll get torched by the Chinese one. It's too cheap. There's no way. I mean, the Tesla one looks really exquisite, and I think what we saw in the drone market, you know, I think the price point that the Chinese are going to bring to it is good. So I'm a big proponent of banning Unitree now. But that's where I stand. But I'm up for debate. What do you got? You with me?
Humanoids? No comment.
No comment. Yeah, I just think, well, if you look what happened with DJI, like they dominated the commercial market, and I think it's going to be playing out again. So tell your guys, you know.
It's the same playbook this time. Yeah, with robotics.
Yeah, these are impressive things, though. Although I do think the hands, like the dexterity on it, you know, they're not that good yet. Did you guys watch the video of the figure robot where they're unpacking the groceries? Did you notice in the video that the humans pulled the groceries out of the bag, and then they did the video? Because the robot can't actually get into the bag. So, like, I don't know if it might be too early. So, you know. All right, where should we go next, Casey? Scott gave me a list of awesome topics that he wanted to, like, throw down, but I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to cover.
No, I mean, I think from my perspective, we've talked a lot about venture-backed lethality, the challenges, but also the opportunity space that comes with it. And I think it's been really fun to hear the perspective on that story from the three different perspectives.
Yeah, you know, I've tried to capitalize my business in a way that, you know, allows for the team to build the good product. But as we say, you know, the best product is necessary but not sufficient in this industry. You know, there's other things that have to happen, and you need the time. You know, you look at some of the capital structures and strategies from the 8BC companies. You know, part of that is that talent is expensive, and it's expensive to build this, but it's also you need the time, right? and that's just part of it. But I think that if you go into that, like knowing that and can strategize around that and understand how it works, like that's how you really set yourselves up, for success in that realm.
I think what 8VC does really good is, so Dino is one of our angel investors. He's the CEO of Saronic. And a good piece of advice he gave me was, if you're going to be a big defense contractor, you have to look like a big defense contractor. And for me, it didn't really
don't
hit.
do podcasts?
Well, no. Well,
that's
for
fine.
me,
Whatever, bro.
I'm walking out now. Maybe that's why Dino's not here. He knows.
Yeah.
But something that really hit for me was when we stood up our manufacturing facility and we had customers come in, potential customers come in, and they actually saw that, hey, we could produce missile systems. It became real to them. Like, okay, cool. If we give this company a contract, it's not just be like an R&D 1 or 2 prototype. These guys could deliver, hundreds of missiles a month out of this facility. And I think that's what 8VC really understands as well, as the scale.
Yeah, and then I think I think what's really cool about defense right now, or just like in general, because of as I mentioned, the geometry that is necessary, is, and I tell this to I've said this to every defense investor in the country over the past years, the capital needs to coordinate, not compete. Like, we need to work with each other to build these companies and get them through the process. And like, that's different than if you're like in San Francisco doing AI and you're competing with Lightspeed on like every deal, or Sequoia or whoever. They're like, we have to compete on every deal. We have to have edges. We have to, like, every single time we're always competing with the same 4 firms, like whatever. Defense isn't like that at all. Like, it's way more collaborative. It's way more positive sum. We should help each other out with things. And like, I see a lot of that. And like, platforms help each other. Like, oh, like that company should talk to that person in this group. Like, we're actually the wrong company. Like, I'm just going to introduce my buddy over there, So it's like, I think that like global knowledge piece and like positive vibes, whatever you want to call it, or like, that's the like religion I'm preaching about it, is like, is let's collaborate and like help one another. And like, the enemies is not each other. And like, we're all here to help create safety for an American public. But like, we are also like eventually disrupting these big prime contractor guys. So like, the startups should all like band together.
Yeah.
If you actually want to do that with me or whatever, like, let's all help each
do
other out.
Every time, I'm always texting you about that.
Exactly.
I think what we're gonna do, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I want to take some audience questions. We got 10 minutes, so okay, we got some. Here we go. What up, John?
Are allied forces your customers?
Speak up.
You asked if allied forces are our customers. Since the very beginning, we started working with Australia and other foreign partners. For them, munitions orders takes a very long time for the tactical weapon systems we're talking about. And so, we are working closely with them.
Andrea.
I'm curious about insights into budgeting. So we're cutting a lot with DoD, but then also there's new money coming in for these AI type projects. And so how clear is that?
I mean, you're actually the most connected to the White House of all of us.
Yeah, I mean, you probably take that one.
I think this is a massive, just so I understand the question you're asking, like with these budget changes, what we should expect. Yeah. I think this is a massive opportunity for startups to step in and show how they're cost effective compared to some of these traditional legacy systems. And what DOGE is doing is amazing, especially I've seen some of the stuff they're preparing, going to be releasing soon from the DoD front to solve the contracting process. But from a budget standpoint, they're going after bloated programs. And that's an advantage startups have, is we are highly cost effective, right? We can move much faster and provide better services at a lower cost. So I think this will be massive for the industry.
Let's keep rapid firing them.
Yeah.
What do we got? Yeah.
How do you reduce reliance on like the Chinese supply chain?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was, how do you reduce reliance on the Chinese supply chain? The experts on that side probably know the best.
I cannot make your supply chain decisions for you. I will say you do need to analyze where everything is coming from very closely.
What would you say the smart companies are doing this well, I guess, maybe?
They're really... So I would say you should probably look at this in the R&D stage. Don't start looking at this when you're close to being production ready. Because if you're going to need to swap out a supplier and the form factor is slightly different, you don't want to have to go through a whole new redesign. So what we encourage companies to do is, I'm going to use some military terms, when you're tech readiness level 3 or 4, when you still have things on a bench top maybe not fully put together, that's a time to take a deep look at what you got. And if you're going to make swaps, do it then.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard. It probably warrants a sidebar discussion. I mean, our product has lots of subcomponents, and we're trying to source them in places that need to be sourced from. So it's like a scouring effort. You're trying to find the one random vendor in America that does this thing, and because you know where they do it in China, but you can't use it. And it's just a lot of legwork, you know. It's pretty terrible.
Sometimes they just slap an American flag on it when it's so obvious it came from China.
I have another one.
I really investigate some of these sources.
No, I have another one too. Is the other people that have come before us. So like Saronic, I was talking with their co-founder Viv last night, and he was giving us ideas for IR sensors that I didn't know that vendor that he named. And so like you can ask the people that have been in this ecosystem a little longer at like Anduril or Saronic or something, and they have good ideas on supply chains that work. Because like if you just start out, you're just Googling and it's hard to find.
That's a great point by Casey, though. It's a lot of startups use Chinese components just because it's cheap for prototyping, but then you do realize the form factor is slightly different sometimes, or the weight is different, and you got to redesign that whole thing from the beginning.
What you got? You? Yeah.
Alex Bertram, Australian government. How far back into the supply chain are you looking to go to invest and build capability? So, and in terms of back into mineral sourcing and processing and the like. Half the world's lithium comes out of our country, but vast majority.
I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys think too, but I think we're seeing a lot more like of the VC dollars like flowing back into that, or just even like a good example here would be like this company Senra Systems that does the wire harnessing stuff that is sort of like trying to conglomerate things that were done by like ma and pa shops around the country, and like just doing like a more like the hardcore startup version of that, and then they're going to like VC, like the big VC firms and this sort of thing. And there's I think there's going to be more of this like investment in like core supply chain, just like as really smart groups kind of put together projects around that. I don't know if you guys have thoughts.
How far back are we going? Well, I haven't angel invested in anything like at the like lithium mine level or something, but that's a tough one. I don't have a good answer for you, to be honest. What do you got?
Andrew with Malcolm. So, advice for startups trying to get into the defense supply chain by building components and not full systems. So, if you guys have any advice?
Like a brushless motor or something, or like a component, like a subcomponent.
We're a fabless semiconductor startup building power amplifiers, front-end modules, beamforming ICs for StatComs and some, DoD systems. But we don't build the full system.
Okay. Oh, I know. I have good advice for you. What you could do. So our podcast is really blowing up, and you could sponsor it and get your name out there. And actually, you'll totally crush it. I promise. Everyone listens to this shit. So yeah, just do that.
I think when it comes to selling components like that, honestly, if you could get around having to sell to the DoD altogether, and you could just go directly to those companies, I mean, that's what I would do.
Yeah, the best companies to make really are your tech companies selling to other tech companies. That's really where you want to be. We're gluttons for punishment up here, right? But if you're going to start something, that's what I would probably start.
So I could just say, we have companies that are doing more of the subcomponent side in our portfolio, and we always try to make introductions directly to primes. And our assumption for their transition pathway is they're going to transition what we call back through industry, which is they're going to get picked up by a prime, they're going to be a subcontractor on a proposal, and that's the ingestion pathway. So definitely second, that a pathway for you to consider, because I'm the government and I can't tell you what to do. So Casey's opinion, consider B2B.
Yep.
A quick question for a litmus test for a startup that is always under-resourced. What's the level, either from number of employees or revenue or TRL level, where it makes sense to start to engage, not to waste your or our time? And what's threshold?
With like investors or with AAL? With a customer or with investors? Engage.
Well, actually, either one is interesting, right? But at what level would you recommend to start engaging?
So we start upper level, tech readiness level 3. So think you've got all your subcomponents working together on a benchtop type level. That said, our goal is that you are at like min viable product in 2 years, maybe 3. One's better than 2, 2's better than 3, etc. So if you're not there, we're probably not the right home, but there are definitely places in the DoD that could be. Defense Cyber Sitter program is one example that can do, seed money, especially if you're really early stage and that is non-dilutive.
Yeah, I would just say, I think for the fundraising stuff is just like mapping what the dollar amount that you're asking for with like a plan. Like, what is whatever the seed round, $3 million, whatever it is. What does that buy? Does that like get you through a prototype? Does that get you through the calendar she just said, like the 2 years? Just like having that be coherent, like, and really like tied off. I think that's it. It's just giving like investors know what they're buying, and then like, okay, here's like the goals, and then here's what the markers for success are. Here's like the plan that's being underwritten. I think if you have a good explanation of that and it's very accurate, then like that builds trust, and you can kind of find the matchmake for the right investor who's interested in going on that path with you.
Jenny.
So part of defense innovation is supply chains are constantly changing. And do you have a method for the readiness evaluation of these suppliers? Because it would suck if someone ran out of an IR sensor or something else. Like, are you going through some sort of like, you must have 5 things to be a supplier for us?
The question is, are we as startups evaluating the suppliers' supply chain themselves and their readiness? I would say for us, not all of them, but the most important ones we are. So like we want to know the subcomponents in their component and where those come from, just in case like there's a shortage of those, because that's like the long pole in the tent. For if I need to order like 50 motors or like 100 motors and they're like short on the magnets, or something that's in their supply chain, like we want to know about that because we want to help them pre-buy that stuff. So like we go to them and say, look, I'll just buy a bunch of the subcomponents that go in your component. You can just hold them at your shop here until we're ready to buy the rest of it. So for the most important things, you want to get ahead of it and do that. You have to just know like what to ask though of these people. It's kind of hard.
What is the process for that?
Well, it's like being a good electrical engineer, just like kind of having a good sense of like what goes into those things, and then trying to like pre-buy. Ask them, hey, can we get 100? And if they say, the sales rep says like, oh, I don't know, why, you dig in and really find out why you can't get 100. They'll probably eventually get some technical person on and be like, oh, we're missing this one piece of it. It's actually a like long lead time from, Australia or somewhere. And so then you like try to pull that thread and then buy those and get them to them. Yeah.
Yeah, we follow the same strategy as Steve, but we also ask for all these suppliers, like, can you do 5,000, at scale? And then we have plan A, plan B, plan C, supply chain plans.
Black Hat.
Hey.
2 questions left.
Justin with Prism. Was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that playbook that you use for tech transition with portfolio companies. What does that look like?
Sure. So we align the team up front. And by that I mean we figure out who is the most likely person that's going to transition you. We have them involved from the beginning. We have end users involved, assuming it's an operational problem. If you're building a better motor, that's really great, but you don't need to talk to a soldier because they're going to look at the motor and be like, this is cool, but the motor itself does nothing for me. What does the requirements look like? What is the requirements trace? Does one exist? Are we going to have to write one? Are we going to have to modify one? Because without a requirement, the Army can't buy anything. And then who are the right scientists and engineers that are going to help? If it is going to be lethal and you're building a new fuse, let's get the fuse board involved early. If you've got to go to the non-nuclear test board, let's get that involved early. If you need to get on the network, let's get the person that's going to authorize you for your authority to operate. Let's get on that. Essentially, get that team together from the start. And then keep them engaged. Don't let them fall away. So all of those people are ideally on your progress report meeting every month. They are all coming to your midterm design reviews so that we don't use paper transition agreements at AAL where a PM signs on a line and says, I'll take this, because they're Casey's opinion, not worth the paper they're written on always. But if they remain engaged, we can ensure your project isn't accidentally drifting 5 degrees off azimuth and they don't forget you're coming because they're having those meetings constantly with you. So really that's our playbook. That and if there could be multiple transition pathways, let's cultivate all of them so that if one falls through, there are backups.
All right, last question in the back corner, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, I was just interested if you had any thoughts on increasing defense budgets in Europe, particularly Germany, whether that might increase startup activity there, what might come here, or companies here that might want to go there.
Yeah, I'm honestly the last like 10 days has been our inbox has been getting hit up for our product from European entities. Something's happening. There's activity picking up. It wasn't like that 20 days before that.
I mean, I can't comment on what's happened in the last 10 days, but I actually went to Poland in December for their Globe State conference and had discussions with their military about how we operate, how they could set up something similar to us to engage their industrial base. Obviously, culturally, regulatory-wise, there are differences that have to be taken into account. Have these conversations with our Australian friends, with our British friends. How can we share companies? How can we share problems? So definitely seeing lots of transoceanic desires to collaborate, especially with early-stage companies.
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone needs to subscribe. Smash the like button on the YouTube channel. I need to get the subscribers up so I can start monetizing, so please do it. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Cool.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Steve.
Yeah.